Good evening. 6 South Korean opposition parties submitted a bill earlier today calling for President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. The president declared martial law on Tuesday evening, only to reverse the move hours later, triggering a political impasse in Asia's 4th largest economy. Well, tonight we look at the regional security implications, including the role of South Korea's neighbours to the north, and ask where the current crisis might go next. Well, with me in the studio to discuss this topic are Anastasia Lavrina and Orkan Amashov. But first, Chris Gilbert reports on the latest developments in Seoul.
Guy, the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol faces impeachment following that late Tuesday night decree he made of martial law, which was only revoked just hours later, but triggered protests which have been ongoing, calling for him to step down. Now, the opposition party, the Democratic Party, has filed a motion of impeachment that is expected to be voted on by Friday or Saturday, but this all follows Yoon Suk-yeol, of course, making that decree, justifying it by citing pro-North Korean members of the opposition party, which he alleged was destabilizing South Korea, only for Parliament to shoot down that decree of martial law a few hours later. If the impeachment motion passes, he could be stripped of his presidential authority, at least until the Constitutional Court decides his fate. But whether or not he is impeached is still uncertain, because the motion needs 2/3 of South Korea's parliament to pass it, and the opposition party which filed it at the moment holds a majority, but only just over half, about 56%, meaning that they need members of Yoon Suk-yeol's own People Power Party to support the motion and vote against the president, which may be difficult but not impossible, especially considering that the PPP's own leader, Han Dong-moon, said that he wants to see those responsible for the martial law decree held accountable. Now, there have already been resignations, those of the Chief Cabinet Secretary and those of other secretaries inside the People Power Party, but protesters are calling for the resignations of the Defense Secretary and, of course, for President Yoon Suk-yeol. And experts expect those protests to only grow as the status quo continues. Chris Gilbert for AnewZ in Tokyo.
Well, as countries consider the consequences for geopolitical stability, the United States is one influential actor tracking the situation very closely. Let's just remind ourselves of what the US State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel said yesterday when asked about the situation in Seoul and the potential influence of North Korea.
We are watching the recent developments in the ROK with grave concern. We are seeking to engage with our Republic of Korea counterparts at every level, both here in the United States and in Seoul. The Secretary has been briefed, and we're keeping him appraised of the developments, as well as monitoring closely what's happening on the ground. Let me also just mention that our alliance with the Republic of Korea is ironclad, and we're fully committed to that. And ultimately here, our hope is, and every hope and expectation is, that any political disputes will be resolved peacefully and in accordance with the rule of law.
So with the US transitioning between Biden and Trump administrations, what kind of influence can Washington have on the situation in Seoul? Celeste Arrington, Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at the George Washington University, gave her analysis earlier.
South Korea is one of the United States' most important allies in East Asia. And so the relationship between Seoul and Washington is critical for confronting the North Korean threat, Chinese aggression, and more recently, North Korea-Russia closer ties. My understanding is that President Yoon and President Biden have a fairly good working relationship, and they have promoted trilateral cooperation between the United States, Korea, and Japan during the last year and a half or so that's very important for U.S. interests in the region. So the instability in Seoul, the political crisis that President Yoon unleashed with this martial law declaration is potentially damaging to the Biden administration's interests in promoting the alliance architecture in Northeast Asia. At the same time, it's the end of the Biden administration, and so we have greater unknowns as the new Trump administration comes in. I think a lot of Koreans have been concerned about the potential instability or unpredictability of Trump 2.0, and add to that the unpredictability and instability which we're now seeing unfold in Seoul, and I don't think that that is going to make it easy for policymakers and alliance managers. It also is now partnered with, in Tokyo, a relatively weak prime minister whose party is not in charge in the Diet. So we have now these three key allies who have forged a close trilateral cooperation over the last year and a half, facing politically uncertain times. And I think that opens the door to potential North Korean and or Chinese and Russian moves to destabilize the region, and that would negatively affect U.S. interests in the region.
Orkan Amashov, this is a situation which on the surface at least seemed to escalate very quickly, but just take us back to the situation leading up to this declaration of martial law.
Indeed, yeah. This declaration was announced late night by President Yoon in a televised announcement. He said that there are certain circumstances related to the threat emanating from North Korea, and in view of some of the North Korean elements within the South Korea, it is vital to take this decision and declare this martial law. And also referred to the government paralysis, actually state paralysis in many ways, because as we understand from April 2022, since the latest parliamentary elections, where opposition defeated his party, the party known as People Power Party, roundly and squarely, effectively he lost the influence in the parliament. So whatever attempt he could potentially make in terms of initiating any new piece of legislation and to make sure that is gone through the parliament, he will inevitably fail because composition of the parliament does not favor him. I think the National Assembly of South Korea is comprised of 300 deputies, MPs, and his party does have probably 107 or 108 MPs are from his party, and the majority of the parliamentarians are from the opposition Democratic Party. So effectively, the state machinery is paralyzed in South Korea. They cannot function. And I think that the main reason why he decided to declare this martial law order was down to the internal divisions. He's not particularly a popular person. When he defeated his opponent during the last presidential election, that was by a very tiny margin, about 0.5 or 0.6%. His position is not very tenable. Parliament is completely against him. And very interestingly, when he declared this martial law yesterday, Parliament convened very quickly, and all 190 lawmakers present there, they voted this martial law order down. And according to the Constitution of South Korea, President is entitled to declare martial law, but this is subject to the subsequent approval by the Parliament. And bearing in mind the Parliament did not approve it, then he was effectively compelled to lift this martial law order. I think when it comes to the circumstances related to the build-up to this declaration, to this announcement, they were largely driven from internal dynamics. He wasn't able to govern this country, and South Korea in many ways not governable at this stage. and many former presidents of South Korea faced a similar problem. And then he was forced to take this decision, but that backfired. And now, actually, what we know is that the parliament is considering to impeach the president. We also know that prior to the declaration of this martial law, he had been facing problems in terms of members of parliament suggesting that some of his government officials should be impeached. So what he appears to have done at this stage, capitalizing on this internal issue, and he made an attempt to use external threat theory in order to sort out his internal problems. I think exactly that's what happened in South Korea last night. But that step backfired, and the reality now is that I think that we have this impasse. This problem should be sorted out. Either he should be impeached, but the problem related to South Korea is not exactly to do with the personality of the President Yoon. I've been interviewing today a professor from the Seoul University today, and they have got this semi-presidential system in line with which president is elected as a result of separate election by popular vote. They do not have a parliamentary system in the way we understand it in the UK, Canada, and other common law countries. Because within a parliamentary system, you have general election, and the party which commands the confidence of the House of Commons forms a government. So you've got this direct relationship between Prime Minister, who is the chairman, leader of the leading party in the House of Commons, and the majority within that house. In South Korea, you don't have that kind of link. So president is legitimate, he's head of state, he's not ceremonial figurehead, he's not similar to Salome Zurabishvili, president of Georgia, which does not command any confidence within parliament, and in South Korea, Prime Minister is a presidential appointee. So President actually appoints him subject to the approval of the Parliament. In South Korea, Prime Minister is not leader of the governing party or leader of the party which commands confidence in the National Assembly. I think that many constitutional lawyers, scholars, are actually suggesting that beyond the personality of President Yoon, there is a serious problem in terms of the government machinery, and that will require certain fundamental changes, probably referendum or constitutional changes, and that's the way it should unfold there in the fullness of time. But currently there is a gridlock, and I think that something drastic should happen, and that drastic action should potentially mean his removal by the implementation of the mechanism of impeachment.
Well, how serious a threat is this to democracy itself in South Korea? I mean, many countries rightly take a source of pride in their democracy, but particularly because of the area that South Korea is located in with their neighbours to the north, it's become a particularly strong emblem of their national identity, and it appears now to be, to some degree at least, under threat. Yeah, it is under threat because the announcement of martial law does not mean anything plausible. It effectively means that there is a big problem and that needs to be fixed. This is one interpretation. So democracy is not functioning, because what the martial law is usually declared when normal democratic system is not capable of proper functionality, and the martial law is a sort of extreme last resort intervention by the state, by the military, in order to put everything under order, and then after a certain stage democracy will come back to the equation and will be able to function properly. It's a last-ditch, last resort attempt. So if this attempt is being considered, it means that there is something wrong with the democracy itself. Second interpretation of President Yoon's action could lead us to his abuse of this martial law, which is his prerogative according to the Constitution, in order to sort out his internal issues, to which we made reference earlier. Both interpretations clearly show that there's nothing positive about this whole story. And also, of course, we need to take into account South Korea's extremely delicate geopolitical position. Last time they resorted to martial law back in 1979. For the past 45 years, it has been a prosperous democracy, an example to be followed by other neighboring countries. Although President Yoon mentioned about the threat coming from
North Korea. We do not have enough evidence to believe that this is indeed the case, but he mentioned about certain anti-state elements within the National Assembly working together with North Korea and trying to obstruct the constitutional order within South Korea. And on the basis of what our reporters from different parts of the world are saying, maybe he is exaggerating the scope of the problem. But even if he is exaggerating the scope of the problem, perhaps there are certain elements within the National Assembly who are working closely with North Korean government. And of course, the US is very much concerned about it. UK is very much concerned. All Western democracies are very much concerned about this whole situation. Because when you have this paralysis of government machinery with the president and the parliament being at loggerheads, this actually increases the possibility for South Korea being prone to external influence. And that external influence is understood in this particular situation in the shape of North Korea. And also, of course, we could talk about China and other players who are interested in this destabilization in South Korea. So to what extent President has said something which could confirm with reality is another question, of course. But I think there is an element of danger there. And naturally, the allies of South Korea have legitimate reasons to worry about it.
Anastasia, even if there is no significant proven interference by North Korea, nevertheless, to what extent does it embolden the neighbours to the north?
We can see the reaction of the world community, neighboring countries, to what's happening now in the South Korea, and most of the countries trying to abstain. They don't want to comment, they don't want to say, provide any predictions for the future, what will take place. And talking about China, for example, they refer it as they call it as a domestic issue without any importance to comment on the future expectations. The countries, of course, they call their citizens to stay calm, not to be involved in any political situation inside the South Korea. But United States of America, United Nations, China, Japan, and some other countries already made a statement saying that they are seriously concerned about the future development, but they don't want to comment on that. Therefore, I can expect that neighboring countries, they will wait. They will see, they will follow the political developments in the South Korea. And if there is political instability, if there is any potential risk which can actually start from the South Korea and then after to be enlarged on the neighboring countries, then after we should expect any involvement on behalf of the North Korea, China, Japan, and etc. Actually, investigating the situation, I was quite surprised reading the analysis made by some experts and concerned about the reaction of Japan. We know about the difficulties between Japan and the South Korea. We know about territorial disputes they have. But what's interesting, the Prime Minister of Japan was planning to come to the South Korea in January to talk about the future perspectives and developments as the countries, I mean the South Korea, Japan, together with the United States, are being considered as a strong alliance for defense purposes when we're talking about the threats as they consider them coming from the North Korea. Therefore, despite the disagreements which we may have between Japan, South Korea, and the United States, they are keen to sustain close partnership and cooperation. We could hear the reaction on behalf of the United States of America and the reaction President Biden made yesterday night, being in Angola, if I'm not mistaken. He also expressed his concern. The president of the South Korea, after the elections in the United States, said that he's willing to see the prosperous development of cooperation between the South Korea and the United States of America. So it seems that all of the neighboring countries are now staying, of course, explaining their concern, but still wants to keep good neighboring relations. China also is not going to have any precise actions until the time when there is a concrete steps in inside. If the South Korea, its population and the government officials are able to manage the situation, to achieve the consensus and to decide whether the president is staying or there will be an impeachment, until this time no any intervention we should expect from outside. That's my point of view. If something happens, if there is an escalation, then of course each member, each country in the region will try to get its own profits and benefits, starting from political perspectives and coming back to the economy and then other issues as well.
And you mentioned the economy there. South Korea, of course, is Asia's fourth largest economy. If the political system is in gridlock, how on earth can the economy be expected to work?
Well, it of course will bring some economic difficulties, not only to the South Korea, but to the partnering countries as well, as South Korea has good partnering relations with some global powers, with European Union countries, with the United States of America. And if there is a political instability inside, it will have economic implications as well. We will see how the neighboring countries will try to use these opportunities. Here already we are coming to China, to the North Korea, to Russia even, which will try to increase its presence from the economic perspectives with the Chinese government, for example, and with the government of North Korea. Then we should also expect that the security challenges may affect the reasons, will bring the instability and will pursue the other neighboring countries to think about alternatives, alternative transport routes, and alternative economic partners, energy partners, and etc. So now all countries are waiting. If there is a stable situation to be stabilized inside the South Korea, then of course we won't see any kind of implications. But if there is anything, then we may see some significant changes in the economic routes in the region, within the region itself. First China, second North Korea, and even Japan will try to form a new partnering relations, and even the United States of America, which is a close security partner for the South Korea, will try to balance its own interests, its interest in the region, and its relations with the South Korea. We still waiting the reaction of Donald Trump, who I'm sure will have to say something. Yes, Donald Trump is keen to have special trade relations with China. The experts are already talking about the potential trade war between China and the United States of America. Then how exactly Trump's administration will manage this if there is such a significant and important and difficult relations to start with one of the most significant partnering country as South Korea, the region.
During one of our conversations, Guy, you mentioned about this political, the lack of political stability leading to economic problems. And quite often, as was the case with the Russian ruble, the political uncertainty leads to economic shockwaves, and eventually it leads to what one may call self-perpetuating volatility, and that may evaporate itself at a later stage, of course. But uncertainty leads to unpredictability, and we understand the markets will react in a way that they probably shouldn't react in a way they will react, because there's no economic underlying factor there. That uncertainty may lead to some very strange circumstances, which are not really driven by root economic reasons, but just by the sense of unpredictability, the implications of which are very hard to predict. And I think the self-same will apply to South Korea. As long as Donald Trump is concerned, I think he will be committed to the security of South Korea. It's a matter of a wider geopolitical significance. It's not an internal political dilemma between Democrats and Republicans. But also we heard about his 100% tariff, or universal 100% tariff, which also is applicable to South Korea. I don't know whether South Korea and the United States have a specific arrangement which could militate against this 100% universal tariff. But of course, economic implications may follow, negative economic implications. But the circumstances involving South Korea are incredibly complicated. I mean, this martial law, when we first heard about it yesterday, our first inference was that it is to do with North Korea. Actually, we just misheard the name South Korea. It should have happened in North Korea. And then, of course, we saw that there is an element of nuclear competition, nuclear war emanating from North Korea. And then, of course, this element of surprise about South Korea, which has been a prosperous country over the past 4 decades, and the necessity of putting this into practice was something that we were not able to grasp in terms of its root causes. But reality there is that it's not, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about the personality of the president. President is not very popular. We all understand it. We know that Parliament the members of the Parliament have been trying to impeach government officials. We understand that they cannot agree on next year's budget. So we understand the internal dilemma. To be able to fix this internal dilemma, President resorted to martial law, referencing North Korean threat. So what is really happening here? Is it President abusing his power in order to fix his internal problem, or actually within this charade of the whole story, we have the element of truth which has been exaggerated? I mean, this is a real question to which we need to find an answer. On the basis of the reports we have heard, on the basis of the statements made by United States and other countries, I'm inclined to believe that although probably credibility of President Yoon is no longer where it was before, there could be something in it worthy of further inspection.
Well, Ken, if the problems are systematic and deep-rooted, as you've suggested, is it naive to think that merely impeaching a president will solve the problem?
You're absolutely right. Impeaching wouldn't help. Impeaching will be one of solution. South Korea, as I understand, on the basis of the interviews that I had today, they will need to change their system. The system should be more competitive. It is competitive enough, but it should be governable. The problem there is that if you have this disconnect between the institute of president and the parliament, when you may have a parliament dominated by opposition, and that parliament is actually legislature, you cannot pass any legislation without having majority in that parliament. And president being the head of the executive branch of government, that principle of the division of powers does not really work. There must be some connection. I mean, within the parliamentary system, it is incredibly easy. The Prime Minister's party commands confidence in the House of Commons, and eventually you have a system which functions. But now they have a minority government. They call it minority government. They cannot command confidence in the House of Commons. By House of Commons, I mean the National Assembly. And that is a root cause of the paralysis. And it's not the first case of this kind, by the way, although martial law has not been put into practice in South Korea over the past 40 years, but previous president had a very similar problem, and that was also about budgetary issues. That effectively means that either they need to have ceremonial president with prime minister being effectively head of government, or they effectively need to find some sort of other solution. Effectively, I mean, incidentally, the problem that we have in France is not entirely unrelated to the problem that we have in South Korea. There, it's all about vote of no confidence. The government, actually, there in France, is not in a position to govern, and we will see what will happen there as well. So it is fundamentally very deep constitutional question about the best form of governance. When you have head of state and head of government concentrated in one person, some people may say that it's a super presidential system, it's not democratic enough, but it is really, it depends on the internal circumstances of a given state, or it depends on the traditions of a given jurisdiction, of course, but there must be certain element of connection between the parliament and president. If president is a sole figure and parliament is completely against him, that system will be paralyzed. Let's assume it's a completely different scenario. Assume that President Yoon and the Parliament have got the good relations. Assume that his party, People's Party, have got majority there. But if to look at what happened yesterday, quite extraordinary thing happened yesterday. Out of 300 MPs, deputies, 190 were present there. We know that 172, 73 deputies are actually from the opposition. but 190 voted in favor of actually lifting this martial law. So certain members of the government, in league with the opposition, actually worked against the president yesterday. For that reason, actually, I'm inclined to think, bearing in mind what Anastasia said earlier, 2/3 needed in order to impeach president, that impeachment may actually be realized. But as you said earlier, impeachment is not a solution. It's a one-off solution. It will sort this crisis, but it will not fix greater crisis, which is to do with deep constitutional structure of South Korea.
And especially because the Minister of Defense, if I'm not mistaken, also decided to leave his office even before the procedure started after this martial law, and several presidential advisors also decided to leave. Therefore, it means also that in his political party, the president doesn't have enough support.
I'm sorry, did the Minister of Defense leave his office before martial law?
No, after.
That was a very interesting moment.
They wanted to impeach him as well, but he did it by himself voluntarily.
So that was a very interesting moment there, actually. So what happened? President announced martial law, then Parliament voted it down, and there were like 2 hours when there was a degree of uncertainty, and then the journalist contacted Minister of Defense asking that person, is he going to lift the martial law? He said that I will do so if President says so. So they had this constitutional crisis because what President did effectively was unconstitutional. And the defense minister, who is actually responsible to president, needed to act in line with constitution. But acting in line with constitution actually meant acting against president. So you realize the magnitude of the paralysis, which is massive, and therefore the deep issue, underlying issue, which is to do with the constitution, must be sorted out in order to avoid next scenarios of this nature.
The president himself is being asked to leave his office for the sake of protection the spirit of the Constitution.
Yeah.
So the policymakers themselves understand the importance of these movements to happen in order to support the constitutional development and to show to the world community that South Korea is a democratic country. It's with a democratic society which is aiming to move forward with this democratic union in order to sustain the economy, to sustain the political system. And my colleague actually brought a very good example about the situation in France. Today, I had a chance to speak with an expert who predicted the consequences for economic development, future development of the economy in France and its implications for other European countries, and not only if there is vote of no confidence to take place, and actually there is a discussion going at the moment. Therefore, if it happens in France also, it will have an implications for a global economic order as well. The same situation is happening in the South Korea. Despite the fact that this is domestic issues, it may have a significant and important implications for a global economy as well.
Well, let's talk a bit more about the global economy, Anastasia. So China has proven to be a shrewd geopolitical operator. What does China do now? How does it react? How does it manage this situation going forward?
China, from the official statement, mentioned that this is a domestic issue to be solved by the South Korea and they're not going to intervene. It comes from the official statement made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and there is no any steps which is being driven by the Chinese government at the moment. They also are concerned about the Chinese citizens who are now staying in the South Korea. They call them to keep silence, not to be visible in any kind of protest or anything else. But neither China nor United States or any other country is calling the citizens to leave the countries. Therefore, they do expect that these, let's say, what we have protest on the streets has quite peaceful character and not going to be escalate after some time. But they stay neutral without any particular intervention. And those statements which were mentioned about the threat on behalf of the North Korea, from where the Marshall Plan itself, it's Marshall statements and all of those law which started in the beginning last night. Even yesterday during the discussion here, we were saying that the president himself should bring some practical examples on why he decided to have this law at night. It was announced at 11 or which time in South Korea. And then after there was no any practical statement or examples why this threat is actual for the people, for the population in South Korea. No concrete examples, no concrete movement. So he made a statement and disappeared.
I
and then
actually
after
said
some time
that he described the Parliament, National Assembly, the collection of traitors, I think that. But he was probably referring to all the opposition members, 173 of them. So effectively he's saying that South Korean opposition is in league with North Korea, and they want to overthrow the liberal constitutional order of South Korea, and by declaring martial law he wanted to protect this noble ideal of South Korea. That's what he said. But that's how the political rhetoric is constructed. I mean,
we can understand.
Because imagine, I mean, if a South Korean president is strong enough, supported by the public, he declares martial law, and then this martial law put into practice, and the National Assembly is not in a position to do anything about it, then he will emerge as a hero. But he has not managed to emerge as a hero because Parliament is very strong, and actually, according to the South Korean constitution, he cannot dissolve constitution.
Martial law, that means that he will take control over all of the forces and the media. That's very important. So what is the connection in between of this threat, which is coming from the North Korea, he's calling this, and at the same time, that means that he's taking the power in his hands, concentrating over all of the forces, media sources, and other political institutions. So the population themselves,
driven by the doctrine of necessity. If country cannot be governed by democratic means, and there is an external threat coming from neighboring country, the authoritarian style, the military coup is justified. That is that was used back in 1980 in Turkey, used in many other countries. It is invariably undemocratic. It never looks very positive. But if you manage to get through, you may emerge as a hero. That's what I'm saying. But he hasn't managed to emerge as a hero because effectively South Korea is a democracy, and that's what has been proven, I believe.
We can expect that China, of course, will use its opportunity from the economic and political perspectives if there is a political crisis and political collapse in the South Korea. Then, of course, China may react on that. China may decide to foster its collaboration, as I mentioned previously, with Russia, with North Korea, when it comes to trade, political cooperation, to balance also the interference and influence of the United States in the region. United States have very strong relations, and even its military presence in Japan and South Korea. And if South Korea is dealing with its domestic issues, that means that United States will have to wait without interference or to intervene, but only if there is a threat from outside. It's not proven. Therefore, there's no any reason for the United States to intervene.
And please, continue.
Yes, I mean that China will use its opportunity to increase its presence, to balance the presence of the United States, especially because Trump, as I already mentioned, promised to have a special trade relations with China to balance its influence and presence. China will definitely use it for its own perspectives.
And in the case of unlikely escalation between North Korea and South Korea, the government in North Korea will expect some support from Russia as well, because North Korea is known for its support to Russia in its war effort against Ukraine. So that there will be some expectation that something in return should come from Moscow as well. That also adds another layer of complexity to the whole situation.
Both, thank you very much for your analysis, as always. And that is all we have time for on this hour. Thank you very much for watching. Do stay with us on AnewZ for much more news and analysis. And we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.